Hello, fellow miniature painters and hobbyists. Today we are going to take some 30-year-old paints. These are paints that I had gotten originally brand new in the early 90s, mid-90s. Some might be late 80s, but I think pretty much most of them are going to be in the 90s. And we're going to see if they still hold up. I've had these for the entire time, bought them brand new myself, continue to have used them throughout these decades. I know that, Army Painter and Citadel, they're all the rage, and the speed painters are out there, and there's a lot of great products for hobby painters now that didn't exist when I grew up painting. So I wanted to share this with some folks, just a real quick overview, some examples that we have that we're going to paint. Using some of these original paints, we're going to test them out, see how they hold up still after 30 years. Some of these I haven't opened in probably 10 years, maybe a little bit longer. We'll have to see. I kind of go through weird phases where I'll paint like mad for a few months and then go 2 or 3 years without painting at all and paint like mad again. I do want to give a quick caveat that I am not a professional painter at all. I'm just a regular, average Joe Schmo, maybe dry brushing, maybe some basic techniques, but usually don't use like wet palettes or, the dabs. And you see professional painters, I've got like a million different paint colors on their arm as they're testing everything out, and they put out some really great work. And I'm not trying to take anything away from those folks. They're highly talented, but I'm just a regular person. Paint some minis. Hopefully they turn out halfway decent. If they're good from about 3 feet away, then they're good for me because I use them for gaming. I don't just use them for display, and we put them out in our games and do that kind of thing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and break out some of these things and test out and see how they turn out. So stay tuned. All right, so let's get started. I've got a series of miniatures here. I've already kind of done some test runs on it, but I'll go over them again so you can see it. I've got one that's pre-primered a dark gray. This mini is actually from a 3D printed STL file that I have on my website from Twilight Fables, the supplement book that I came out, Any nominated. They'll pat me on back there for a minute. Monster book for 5e and for OSR. This creature is an Aralez. It's the winged dog or wolf that lives in the heavens, and during battles, it'll occasionally fly down and lick the faces of fallen warriors that fought valiantly, and that warrior will be brought back to life. That's the lore behind this particular creature. So I'll do some testing with this one. I've got a very basic, just white primered bones mini knoll that I'll do some painting on. And then I have just another dark metal mini. I just want to kind of show you a little bit on that, one of the things I do with it. So what we're going to go over is I've got a few brands of different paints. I've got Ral Partha. This is a purple worm purple paint. They come in these type of paint pots. I gotta say these paint pots are probably one of my favorite paint pots I've ever used, and that's because they've got like a built-in reservoir. You just shake the bottle up, you've got the little reservoir in there you can use out of, and then just recap it and reshake it whenever you want more paint. I've got a tray that I've used sometimes, but I don't use paint droppers all that often, although recently I've kind of had to with Army Painter, being exclusively paint droppers, and the only alternative being the Citadel paints, which as these old the pots that they have, I hate these pots. I absolutely hate these pots. As someone who paints out of pots, I really don't like how the little tag here at the bottom breaks off super easy, so they don't ever stay open. The flip, Citadel, man, please go back to a different pot. In fact, if you had to do anything in Citadel, go back to your old pots that you had. Some of you might recognize these from like these are early 90s. These Citadel pots here, way better than this new pots you've gone to. Can't stand them. Anyway, that's enough of me ranting. So speaking of Citadel, I will also be doing some Citadel color pots, and then I've got some P3 formula paints that I'll also be painting out of. You can kind of see that these things have been cracked a little bit, so I have to see how that goes. Now, these paints are all 30 or older, 30 years or older. I think I got them in the early 90s up until like the mid 90s. I think all the AD&D paint pots, I think these are all from maybe 94, 95. I think they made these up until 97, but I can't recall. I probably should have looked that up before I did it. So let's just, some of these I haven't opened in in years. This Dwarf Forge color here, Dwarf Flesh, I haven't opened in probably 7 or 8 years up until today when I just did a quick little paint on it. So let me start with this one while we've got it up. This is Citadel color Dwarf Flesh paint. Depending on how my phone is orientated, maybe easier to read. I hate this paint. Citadel is very hit and miss. I don't like these type of paints because this is exactly what they do. I'll try so you can see it. It's going to be kind of hard. These type of paints, you've got to paint multiple coats. You can see how you put one coat on, it just comes right up through. Just a real quick disclaimer, I'm not painting for accuracy here. I'm not like trying to keep to the lines or anything else. I'm just slapping paint on just so you can see how well does this paint work on minis, and after 30, 35 years, does the paint actually still work? So you can see that the flesh color, you get there, that's probably more in focus. You got to put like 2 or 3 coats on it, and then you start losing detail. I don't like that paint at all. By contrast, the metallics from Citadel are some of my favorite paints I've ever painted with and ever used. They go on so smooth, and you can tell by the sword here, there's no dripping, no leaking, nothing. It goes on perfectly. Let me try a different one that's not pre-painted metal. And we'll see how it goes on. Also, I love how this pot stays, right? Compared to the other ones, it just sits right there perfectly. A nice tight fit. There's like, I haven't put anything into this paint in years, and it's still wet. Speaking of which, these old paints, I haven't put paint extenders or any other chemicals in with them. If they started, evaporating, going dry, the only thing I've ever added to these paints is water over the last, 30 some odd years. So this one seems to be perfect, still fine condition. So let's see just how it goes on. I have to apologize if there's a little bit of lint on this mini. It's been sitting in a drawer for God knows how long, since this Boone's released it. I think I speak for 95% of amateur miniature painters out there when I say that we probably have dozens, if not hundreds of minis that are unpainted, just sitting in drawers somewhere that we just haven't got around to. It's kind of like mechanics can't have too many 10mm sockets, and mini painters can't have too many minis. It's just how it goes. And again, so I'm just painting on here just to slap stuff on. It looks like, as you can tell, it's going on nice and smooth. So, hey, this 30-year-old paint, still great, still going strong. I will make another brief comment in that, I guess the disclaimer reviews were, I am not a professional miniature painter. I am not, I don't use fancy techniques. I don't, do a lot of washes, and you see some of these professional videos where they go over with a mini, and they got this tiny brush, and they're going over like a wet mixing just over and over. I can't do that. I mean, well, I can, but I don't do that. I'm just a regular miniature guy, paints them. Like I said earlier, if they're 3 feet away, they're good to go because we use them. One thing I did do with some of these paints is, you can probably see at the bottom, there's like this brown. And the reason why that is because back in the day, to keep them mixed and to help them mix, I had put copper BBs in a lot of these, and I have still balls. I think I was in Germany at the time when I got these, maybe Korea. So I put copper BBs in it to shake them up. And honestly, it hasn't affected the paint that I've noticed. So even though it looks a little bit corroded down in there, it hasn't bothered me at all. So let's go ahead and break this one open while we got it. The AD&D paints are kind of hit and miss with me. I absolutely adore and love the pots. Absolutely love them. They're, as I mentioned earlier, as you can see, you just paint out of the reservoir, and then you just like slap the paint on. They don't drip. They don't leak. They don't, they just go on really nice and smooth. It's a little bit of a grittier paint texture than some other paints, especially more of the Army Painter, but that doesn't bother me if you're doing like a darker paint. Like this, you can see that it goes on pretty well, right? There's no problems with here. The only challenge is that once they do go on and dry, they tend to rub off. This one is not really doing it. Like I said, a good job priming it. But on metal miniatures, they tend to rub off easier than other paints. On white miniatures, this is where I kind of have a problem with most AD&D paints. When you're using a white miniature, and I'll just throw this on really fast. Hopefully you can see these better. It's hard for me to look through the camera and what I'm painting at the same time. But you can kind of see that the highlighted areas, the paint doesn't go on like in an even coat. You have to put like 2 or even 3 coats on to get a nice even coat on. When this starts to dry, these raised areas, it'll look like it has very little paint on it at all. And I really don't like that about most of the AD&D paints. There is a few exceptions to the AD&D paints that do that. One of them is one of my favorite paints of all time. I wish that they still made these because they don't. And that is, you probably can't see it. It's called the Werefur Brown. It's kind of got like a little bit of a metallic tint to it. And this paint is, it smells weird compared to the other paint. It's not bad, just weird. It always has since I got it, but no issues. Again, if you can see the sheen in that, the reason I love this so much is when you're painting something with fur, and let's just throw this on this Knowles mane real fast. It kind of gives that little bit of a shiny sheen to it, and it goes into the recesses pretty nice. But it looks good on its own, but when you put an ink wash over it, it really pops and looks like, well, I don't want to say natural fur, but almost like a supernatural fur. There, you can probably see that better. It's just one of my favorite paints to use, is this Werefur. I wish more browns use it. It almost feels like you're cheating by skipping a step by not having to do like highlights or dry brushing or anything else. So let's break out this dwarf flesh, and I'll show you why I don't like it. I did this a few minutes ago. I kind of cheated. Just want to see to show you how it looked when it was dried. You look at it. It's just horrible. You got to do like 2 or 3 coats on this, and then you gotta do. You lose your detail on the model. I don't like it at all. But these metals, these Citadel metals, again, are my favorite. Let's pop open this gunmetal black and see how that looks. We did the silver. Let's see how this one works. This bottle I probably haven't opened in probably maybe 7 or 8 years. And you can tell it's still, I didn't even add anything to it. These bottles hold up really well. Again, Citadel, if you're listening, go back to these bottles. Don't get rid of the ones that you have. So the gunmetal, I really like as well. It just, God, there's no leaking. It goes on super, almost like a thicker coating, but not so thick that you're losing a lot of this detail. And then when you start putting like an ink wash after that to get the dark in the recesses, it's a great ink. Love this kind of ink. Now on to my favorite. And I know this is my favorite. I can say that even though I haven't opened the bottle in years, because I've always loved using this. And this is these P3 formula paints. Oh God, I wish I had more than these. I think I had red, purple, and maybe a couple other colors, whereas I've got dozens of pots of the other stuff. Again, unfortunately, the pot's kind of cracking and breaking, but these are my favorite paints. And the reason these are my favorite paints is because, let's just go ahead and paint. Let's paint the back of this guy's shield. Not only do they go on smooth, almost like a nail polish, but they have a great coverage, and the vibrancy is like, it's so vibrant and so just like stands out. They're not gritty like the AD&D paints are gritty. This P3 paint, once I put it on it and it dries, it doesn't rub off very well at all. On this paint, you can kind of see, you know, oh, I have to do like more than 1 coat because that gray's kind of come through there a little bit, but you really don't need to. Once it dries, it's fine. And on a lighter color, it's even better. When it goes on a white primered or a light colored, it's really nice. So I wish I had more of these P3 paints. But anyway, the whole point, I suppose, of this task, this video, was to break out these paints that are 30 years old, see how well they still painted, how well I still like them. You don't need to maintain them. Like I said, no extenders, just water. And every single one of them are doing really well. Again, I'm not a professional painter, so anything that's that's poor quality in the painting is my fault. It's not the paint's fault. It's not the mini's fault. The only thing that I would suggest doing is if I were to use these type of paints here, or let me find one that's, oh, the yellows are notorious for not doing coverage. So is to do, it's I think it's called the slap chop method, is to do a dark primer and then do a dry brush over it. Because then when you're using these paints, these AD&D paints, because it's natural tendency to need more than one coat to get coverage, you actually can probably get away with not doing it. Because you've got the way the highlights are set and the way you've got the darker primer underneath it, because it's a thinner, it's not a thinner paint, it's a thick paint, it just doesn't do the coverage. You don't have to put that second coat on to be able to get the difference. Although I'd probably still recommend it either way, just because these are grittier paints, are going to rub off a little bit more. I don't know, you know, everyone uses their minis differently. I tend to paint minis because I like to use them, right? I like to have them on the game board, and not necessarily for display. I'm not that great of a miniature painter to be able to paint on a for display purposes. I got a couple that I'm proud of, but some of them are not. They're not. I'm just not that good of a painter. It's not through lack of talent. It's just that I don't want to spend 2 hours, 3 hours painting. So this is it. 30-year-old paints. They're holding up. Again, favorite pots, not favorite paints. The AD&D paints. Best metallics I've ever used to this day. These pots are way better than existing Citadel pots, in my opinion. And finally, best paints. I think if you were to go for a retro paint or find these old paints, P3 are by far the best. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I apologize for my lack of camera skills or setup. I don't have a YouTube setup, a camera system. I'm not a YouTube influencer or creator or any of that stuff. I'm just regular Joe Schmo with a little hobby desk of minis that I paint every once in a while, and that's it. So hope you enjoyed it, and that if you happen to find old paints like this, don't shy away from them, because they can still be used. They're still good, right? Us older things don't go bad just because we hit 30 years old or older, or 40 or 50, as the case may be. So happy gaming. I hope you enjoy everything. I hope you found this informative and fun, and I will talk to you guys later. Thanks.